If you could go back in time for a day to witness a historic event, which would you choose? Asterisk Strasbourg, 1518. To witness the event where the whole town succumbed to mass hysteria and danced themselves to death over 2 months. Do we actually have a ton of graves or something to mark the fact that this really happened? I always wonder when I hear something like this, if nothing really happened, and we're actually just missing some scathing 5-century-old political satire. You know the Strasbourgers, man. In 1518, they basically danced themselves to death. Well, this looks like a cavalcade of beggars, scene and wine, so let's pour the Chardonnay, but don't hate what you'll find. Towns of ash with a music-born sickness. The more you dance, the more you grow finished. Come and prance with the mad and the livido. It's kicking in, 'cause I've been waiting far too long to not play my part, and not fear the wicked with open arms. I welcome thee, but please believe it won't end in rhythm. I have always wanted to go back in time to somewhere around 4500 BC and just record the languages being spoken around the world. There are entire fields of research that deconstruct proto-languages of the languages we speak. But those can only go so far back and don't account for all the other languages that got abandoned over time. The only hard part would be choosing how far back in time to go, because humans have speaking languages for a very, very long time. Not specifically about language, but your comment does remind me of some things. How the history of my country obviously has no written record from that time. The Druids, for example, left no written records of themselves, and we only have 1 or 2 Roman sources for information about them. There's also the Dark Ages after the Romans left, when again there are hardly any written records, which means a lot of gaps in knowledge. So much lost to history that we will never know. Imagine being able to actually see that and get some answers. Have you ever read or watched John McWhorter? He's a linguist with some great info on this. I think he surmised that while the first language will never be known, there's strong logic that it could have been one of the click ones from East Africa. What's fascinating is that while he clearly loves languages, he sees the progression of the million-plus languages originally on Earth naturally merging into 24 or so. He's not convinced that language loss same cultural loss. Big argument there, and I'm not informed on it. Assuming I have a safe vantage point on some kind of spaceship, I choose the planetary impact that's believed to have given us the moon. Imagine if you were on original Earth as that happened. You would first notice as the Mars-sized planetoid approached that gravity was changing. Tides were different. Weather changes. As it approached closer and closer, your weight would begin to decrease as you grew lighter and lighter. Maybe the planet would go dark as it consumed the sky from horizon to horizon. Eventually, the gravity would be so different that you'd begin to feel weightless as the planetoid got closer. Earthquakes would likely be severe, tidal waves would sweep over the ground, and then the collision would crack the Earth open like an egg, with all the hot gooey yolk, magma exploding outward and ejecting a mass into space. So much would be ejected that it would begin to clump together by its own gravity, and form an orbit around the new Earth. Because of this utter chaos we can live nowadays, dependent to a large extent on a moon born of cosmic chaos. The other day I was talking to an ex who is initially from Russia but came over here to the US and studied a variety of languages, and he told me that in most languages, history and story were the same word. Reading your comment makes me wonder, is something only history if it's been told, carried down by people? Like, is history really just a thing that happened? Or something there are stories about? I kinda feel like it has to be something that someone, somewhere witnessed and told other people about. Like, not necessarily written or preserved or anything, but like, someone must have had the ability to communicate that to someone else. Like, go back far enough until we weren't necessarily Cro-Magnons, but modern enough for language. I'd like to see Tenochtitlan before the Spanish destroyed it. I love reading accounts of the Spanish coming into the Americas for the first time. When they landed at what is now Corpus Christi, TX, there were so many sea turtles that they couldn't sleep because it sounded like they were hitting rocks all night. The Americas were incredibly abundant. I see people commenting that the accounts were exaggerated, and many were. But as an example, the Spanish started forcing mining activity in Zacatecas in the 1500s, and there's still silver being pulled out of those mines today. The American continent was full of gold, silver, and platinum in ways that's hard to imagine today. I don't disagree, this would have been fascinating. But don't forget the Spanish had a tremendous amount of help from the Aztecs tributary states who were tired of being sacrificed and extorted. That guile and smallpox brought the Aztecs down. Wouldn't give too much credit to a few hundred Spaniards with pikes and a few primitive firearms. Had the Aztecs not been such tyrants to their neighbors, it's very unlikely the Spanish would have been able to topple their empire so quickly with just a few 100 conquistadors. As a geologist, the Lake Agassiz flood. During the last glacial period, over 12,000 years ago, there was a massive lake in the middle of the North American continent, fed by glacial meltwater. This lake is now known as Lake Agassiz. At its peak, the lake was larger than all of the current Great Lakes combined. Aitwitz put it at 440,000 square kilometers in area. Most of that water was held in place by glacial and topographic dams. At the end of the last ice age, the largest ice body containing the lake to the east in Hudson Bay retreated, melted, causing the lake to drain almost completely in less than 9 months. A freshwater lake with tens of thousands of years of history and input, and more freshwater than all other freshwater bodies on the planet at that time combined, drained in less than a year. The flooding was likely unprecedented, carrying erratics the size of small houses hundreds of miles away. As the water drained into Hudson Bay and other outlets, the global sea level rose by 1 to 3 meters. Lake Winnipeg, Lake Manitoba, Red Lake, and Lake of the Woods are the largest remnants of Lake Agassiz. I knew about the flood, but I had no idea that it was huge enough to raise sea level. 1 meter is big enough. 3 meters is mind-melting. Here's a wacky thought. It's always been a bit of mystery that Paleo-Indians managed to wipe out basically all large North American mammals, mammoths, mastodons, American lions, American cheetahs, giant sloths, etc., given how small their numbers were. I personally think we're underestimating how much damage bored humans can do to human naive fauna. But would a flood this vast have contributed in some way to North American Pleistocene extinctions? Or does the timing just not line up? I live in Portland, or I have imagined watching a Missoula flood. There were several of them from a tall hill. The Willamette Valley flooded to a depth of 200 feet. It's estimated. I wondered what it would be like in the southern part of the valley, far away from the main channel, the Columbia Gorge. The water would start rising and just keep coming up, up, up. How fast would it be moving at the southern end? Could you run away from it? Could you get in a canoe and float up with it? A strange scene to imagine. You see a mighty Tyrannosaurus. It is as majestic, deadly, and sinister looking as you ever imagine. Movies hardly do justice to the savage nature of the beast. Instead of being loud, it pads slowly and stealthily along behind its prey, as careful as a surgeon. It tenses, getting ready to leap for thee. Every fiber of muscle flexes, even through its tough, leathery flesh. The air goes still as the forest braces for its savaging strike. Its muscles uncoil like a compound bow firing. As this Jurassic horror leaps through the air, it lets out its menacing battle cry. For a long time, the Mediterranean Sea was cut off from the Atlantic Ocean, and the rivers flowing into it were not enough to prevent it drying up completely. At some point in time, the ocean was able to cut an opening at Gibraltar, and millions of cubic meters of water poured into the basin. That I would like to have seen. It is called the Zanclean Flood, and the last time it happened was 5.3 million years ago. It was not a big waterfall, but took at least a few thousand years to change from a trickle to a massive stream. So the question if this was the source for the Noah stories. No, the first humans appeared about 2 million years ago in North Africa. Must have been a different flood. There are so many incredible answers here. I don't know if this answer counts, as it's not historic in the terms of a specific event. but I'd love to see early humans and how their lives were. I'd love to witness a hunt and see how they survive. What their early community life was like. What they really looked like. I am curious to know what their teeth looked like pre-farming. How their bodies looked when food was scarce, but they did a ton of walking. And really how they walked without shoes. After writing this out, I'd like to see Otzi the Iceman's last day. Scientists know almost everything they can about his last few days on Earth, but not who he was or why he was murdered. It would be interesting to see the answer to those questions. When the Golden Gate Bridge was finished, my father was one of the first to walk across it. He died when I was 8. Would love to see him again. The bridge opened in 1937, so assuming father was a child then born around 1930. Then Op was probably born sometime between 1950, father in early 20s, and 1980, father in 50s, so is somewhere between 40 and 70. If I had to guess, based on the sentence construction, the Op is about my age 50. My dad was born in 1930. As father passed away when Op was 8, then it's possible he was an older dad, in which case the Op could be even younger. Kai walked across the center of the bridge in 1987 during its 50th anniversary celebration, and it was magical, though later having seen images of its curve being flattened by the weight of all of the pedestrians was a bit scary to think about. Did you see the people on the very center of the bridge camping, replete with sleeping bags, and their campsite that had the appearance of having been there for a week or two? It was remarkable. That evening there was the truly astounding fireworks show out over the bay with the firefall from the bridge. There were fireworks that exploded and released these colorful fiery lantern-like structures that floated down to the water. That to this day is one of the most amazing fireworks shows I've ever seen. The Winged Hussars charge, it was so impressive that a battle nearby stopped just to watch them charge. Sobieski at the Battle of Vienna. I'm no historian, but it's generally accepted that that charge of 3,000 winged Polish hussars, along with another 15K cavalry, the largest cavalry charge in history, and based on nothing, I would surmise is the inspiration for the charge of the Rowery in LOTR saved Europe from the Ottomans. What a goddamn sight to behold. Katorov Library of Alexandria before it was destroyed. This is what I was considering also. I wouldn't be able to understand anything, but somehow copying everything and later learning once they have been translated would still be amazing. I would like to photograph all the art and architectural and cultural aspects of Alexandria as well. After, I would like to visit other places in Egypt and around the Mediterranean like Roman Italy and Greece. Hopefully, I would somehow have a translator and somehow be allowed into all the temples and palaces to photograph everything. The premiere of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in Vienna. The story is that rehearsals were rushed due to time constraints, so Beethoven himself stood next to the orchestra conductor during the performance to give him tempo and dynamic cues. When the last note sounded, the totally deaf Beethoven just stood with his back to the audience, not realizing what the response was. Finally, the soprano soloist went to the maestro and physically turned him around so he could see the audience standing in full ovation, many jumping up and down on their chairs as they cheered and clapped. In 1824, Ludwig van Beethoven's Ninth Symphony was premiered in Vienna, Austria. This was one of Beethoven's most famous compositions, and it was performed at the Karntner Tor Theater, a large theater in the heart of Vienna. The audience was made up of the city's finest citizens, including members of the royal court and important musicians and composers. The performance was a major event and had been highly anticipated by the music lovers of Vienna. As the lights dimmed and the orchestra took to the stage, the audience grew quiet with anticipation. When the first notes of the symphony began, the audience was instantly transported to another world. The Ninth Symphony was a groundbreaking composition, with its powerful themes, complex harmonies, and sweeping orchestrations. As the performance progressed, the audience was moved by its beauty and depth. The Woro finale, with its famous setting of Friedrich Schiller's Ode to Joy, brought the house down as the audience erupted in applause. After the performance, Beethoven was mobbed by fans and admirers who wanted to offer their congratulations. He was greeted with standing ovations, and the concert was widely regarded as one of the greatest musical events of the year. In the years that followed, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony would go on to become one of the most famous and beloved pieces of classical music in the world. Its premiere in Vienna marked a turning point in music history and solidified Beethoven's place as one of the greatest composers of all time. See the asteroid, comet that took out the dinosaurs from a safe distance. There's so many Earth-forming, history-making events I'd love to see purely as an observer. The big asteroid impacts, Siberian traps, forming of the Mediterranean Sea, Krakatoa, Tambora, and the Toba eruption, etc. Doggerland tsunami, and other historic biblical-style tsunamis. Pompeii would be a good one, even if nowhere near the scale of the others mentioned. Most locks intended for homes are straight garbage. They're barely more secure than having no lock at all. They're susceptible to extreme low S-picking, bypass tools, and bump keys. I've seen people pick these lots in the same time it would take to use a key. Don't dwell on it too much. She didn't rob you. Some random hold it. Anyway, you want to dissect the issue. You're still not getting your NSYNC CD back. It sucks, but them's the breaks. With a determined thief, it wouldn't have made a difference. My work was robbed a while back. They smashed a glass window, but there was a locked door. They used a cinder block to bust out the entire door handle. And lastly, they busted out the slide lock that was screwed into metal door frame. I doubt they got $300 for everything they stole, but it cost thousands in damages and expenses to replace the tools stolen. If my being there for one day up means 24 hours, travel to like 15 hours or so beforehand and just warn them. Mention riding with the top up, and have a mannequin sit where he was supposed to be, but he stays at the White House safe with Secret Service watching the thought location more heavily. JFK lives, and the failed attempt most like still ensures the rules change about the presidential parade stuff that would make it harder for would-be future attempts. They try to capture you because of the knowledge and try to figure how you time traveled. Oh well, they won't have much time to because you are returning in a few hours. As horrible as this sounds, I'd rather jump into the car before the shot happens. Yes, Kennedy would have been seriously wounded, but most likely would have survived the back and throat shots. The plot, more than anything, needed to be exposed, and this was the only way. If you would have stopped the murder completely, trust me, it would have happened on another day because they were hell-bent on making it happen. It'd help if there was a second me there to stay with Oswald at all times, to tell him to immediately go outside of the building and stay out there. Do not go to the theater. This isn't historic for anyone but my family. October 27, 2018. I was in Colorado celebrating Halloween. My younger siblings in Texas were at a party. One of my sisters, 15, left the party with an older boy, both drunk. The older boy was driving, and he ran off the road and hit a tree. Older boy broke his back, but lived. My sister died instantly. I'd go back in time, stay sober, park down the road, and wait for my siblings to need a ride and drive them home. The crucifixion of Jesus. I am not Christian or religious. I am just curious about a man that changed the world. Or maybe the resurrection day would be better. Did he really come back? How many witnesses were actually there? During orientation week at a Catholic university, they asked if you could have dinner with anyone living or dead, who would it be? I said Jesus, and everyone was so impressed and thinking I should have said that. But as an atheist at a Catholic university, I had a very different agenda, and everyone clapped. Around the time that the Bohemian Rhapsody film was released, my co-worker confided in me that she didn't want to see it because she wasn't interested in seeing a negative depiction of her friend. As it turns out, she had a number of connections within the music industry, including Freddie himself. She then told me she was backstage at Live Aid to see Queen and pointed herself out in the live footage, and she had attended a number of Freddie's parties. She was such a legend, and by far her story was the coolest name-dropping I've ever heard. My dad committed suicide before I had a chance to meet him. My half-siblings all tell me he had a beautiful singing voice. Maybe not considered a historic event, But if I had the chance to go back in time, I'd like to go hear him sing. I have a similar answer. My mom's bio father passed away back in 2003 due to complications from alcoholism, but I never got the chance to meet him because my mom got adopted as a toddler and her bio mom never told her who her father was. I found his nephew on 23 and in 2020. Turns out he loves to play music. I would have loved to meet him and hear him play. The Emancipation Proclamation speech was much more important and planned for much longer, despite it not actually freeing any slaves in northern slave states like Maryland and any state in secession who returned to the Union. That was the goal from the North's perspective up until that point: preservation of the Union. This speech was ready to be given for nearly a year, but Lincoln sat on it because he knew it would be seen as the propaganda stunt that it was if not given after a great battlefield victory, as the North had been surprisingly losing up to that point with superior numbers, and the war was becoming extremely unpopular. More importantly, some mill-working towns in England and France that were hurt economically by the South's cotton burning were actually trying to get intervention for the Confederacy up until the Emancipation speech. Though the upper class were always against helping the South, so it likely wouldn't have intervened either way. Foreign reporters wrote how Lincoln had masterfully changed the North's reason for fighting from a war of preservation of the Union to a war of liberty and freedom in one stroke. I think it would be interesting to go back and solve historical mysteries. Was King Arthur a real person? Who was Jack the Ripper? Or more recent unsolved murders, etc. I also think it would be cool to photograph ancient civilizations and people to bring back with me to show what people actually looked like. We can make a lot of educated guesses, but having photographic proof would be amazing. Or go back and meet Neanderthals. Learn they were actually pretty smart and take pictures of them. Document their culture and language as best I could. Or go and see the civilizations we're just discovering along the Amazon River. There were apparently millions of people and impressively dense cities. I would love to see the Native Americans existing where I live now. I've often daydreamed about being able to just see normal places throughout history. I grew up in a village in the northwest of England, but that village appears in the Doomsday Book, so there was something there from at least the 1080s onwards. I currently live in what claims to be one of the oldest continued settlements in England, so there would be human activity from Iron Age. Just be fascinating to have a chance to leap forward, take a chance to look around and leap forward again, and just see how these places develop and how humans live. Death. Resurrection of Jesus. Let's see if there is any basis behind Christianity. I don't know of any other religion based on such a singular event. There was an older science fiction short story about this thought. Time travel is invented, and a guy runs a business taking tourists back to see things like the crucifixion. His first run there is basically no one there, no crowds. Next few runs, his next groups of tourists are next to the previous ones watching the same scene. Eventually there is an enormous crowd watching this execution, and he realizes this was not a major event originally. It was just another execution of just another cult leader until all these damn time travel tourists showed up. If I could witness any event unable to actually interfere and somehow magically be protected, considering physically traveling that far back in time is also fiction, so is just as realistic as time travel itself. I would want to witness the Big Bang, of course. Now, if I can witness more than one event, I would want to witness the evolution to modern humans, Mayan pyramids in their prime, as well as Egypt, Rome, Old Jerusalem, Babylon, and Timbuktu just to start. If I could actually interfere, well, everything would be changed, and we likely would not exist as we do now at all. Humans would likely still exist, just not the way society is structured at present. Book burning of Alexandria. I'll go one step farther and see the library before the book burning. Such a huge amount of ancient knowledge was lost. I want to say the majority of writings by Plato and some other Greek authors were lost. My bad. It is Aristotle that only 1/3 of his writings have survived to today. Okay, point taken that it was not singularly due to this library being burned. but the library supposedly had 1 million volumes, and a lot of what was burned were scientific texts that didn't align with new religions. I'm sure there were texts there that backdate scientific discoveries by centuries. I'm probably going to get flack for this, but I want to see the exact moment in history when the Nazis' final solution got the rubber stamp of approval. I want to know who all dreamed it up, how it was presented, how it was funded, and most importantly, I want to know the thoughts of every person involved so I can understand what would drive a group of people to do something as horrific and insane as turning genocide into another part of government bureaucracy. People like to say it was Hitler and a small but powerful minority of his followers, but dictators are nothing without people to follow them. And not every German was bullied into submission. For every conscript or good person in fear of their lives, there was at least one person who fully supported the movement. I want to understand everything involved in making that mess happen. I would want to see the Stonewall riots, March on Washington, the Library of Alexandria, and D-Day that started World War I. I also would like to meet my grandmas on both sides. Just tell them what they missed. Ask to hear my mother's mother sing. Apparently she loved to. And ask my dad's mom to help me make food. She was apparently a good cook. If I could, I would take them back to the future and take them to my choir concert.